Welcome to PatsCast. Good to be back with you. Training camp begins this week. Veterans report on Tuesday, and the first open practice begins on Wednesday. But some are already at the facility, and that includes boy genius Drake Maye, who's been at the facility for about a week now, and he's really taken on a full leadership role this offseason. That's something that Mike Vrabel has talked about. That's something Josh McDaniels has talked about. And certainly something that Drake Maye has talked about and shown in practice, inviting players to his home in North Carolina, or where he grew up, to practice. It looked like his high school field. Do a little bit of off-season workouts, a tune-up before training camp begins. Stephon Diggs, Hunter Henry, Kendrick Bourne, Ramondre Stevenson, Josh Dobbs, Kyle Williams, Demario Douglas, and Jalen Polk were all there to practice with Drake Maye. Kendrick Bourne posted a vlog with all sorts of highlights from their trip down in North Carolina. Check that out if you haven't had the chance. But he's really stepping up and working with his receivers, building chemistry, including Stephon Diggs, who is now permanently away from Cardi B and should be locked in heading into the season. He certainly has plenty to prove and plenty of incentives in his contract to get that money and to be back to the number one wide receiver that we saw in Minnesota, in Buffalo, and very briefly in Houston last year. It should be noted that Kayshon Boutte and Javon Baker were absent from that North Carolina trip. Not going to read too much into that. Some players, they have their own schedules, their own things going on, but good to see guys like even Jalen Polk, who looks like he's 48 years old for whatever reason, but he's out there practicing with Drake Maye, building that chemistry, which, you know, he has a lot to prove. He may not even make the roster when all is said and done. But there's a lot to watch heading into training camp, and the Patriots have extremely high expectations, almost too high. And I'm going to get to that in just a second. But there's a lot of position groupings to be watching heading into training camp here. And I'm going to start off by saying I'm really not worried about the defense. I am not worried about the defense one bit. This roster, or last year's roster, should have been a top 10 defense, but we know Jerod Mayo, who was a good de facto defensive coordinator under Bill Belichick, he really messed it up alongside his DC DeMarcus Covington. We're just going to throw that year out and expect that the players that have been on the roster the last couple years, with good coaching, with Mike Vrabel, with Terrell Williams now as their defensive coordinator, they're going to be back to where they should be. But they also added a lot of really good players. We know Milton Williams was added. Super Bowl star, strip sacked Patrick Mahomes, but didn't play every snap in Philadelphia, so that's going to be something to watch if he's an every down defensive lineman. Is fatigue going to be a factor for Milton Williams? A lot of things to watch with him, but should be a real star out there and a real impactful veteran right off the bat. They added linebacker Harold Landry, a Vrabel guy that will add speed to the linebacker position that we haven't seen in New England since really before Bill Belichick, really since ever. They haven't had speedy linebackers. Bill Belichick always chose size over speed. Well, they got some speed guys out there now. Also added Robert Spillane, who should have a similar impact. They also added Carlton Davis, cornerback, to line up opposite Christian Gonzalez. I think Carlton Davis is a top 10 NFL corner. He's now your number 2. Jamar Chase even called him the toughest cornerback to play against in the entire NFL. So the defense is in good shape. I'd also expect a far more polished version of Kyle Duggar with good coaching. I'd say the same for Keon White, who, when all is said and done, might be the best defensive player outside of Christian Gonzalez with good coaching. Or maybe that's Christian Barmore, who's healthy and ready to go after dealing with blood clots. This should be not just a top 10 defense. This should be a top 5 defense. And I've seen Fox Sports, I've seen a number of sports outlets say the Patriots are as good as a top 3, top 4 defense. So expectations are high, but even if they are in the middle, that's still going to be significantly better than they were last year. But I think if they're outside of the top 10 or even outside the top 5, it's going to go down as a failure this year. But they got guys now. They got guys. They had guys before, and Jerod Mayo and DeMarcus Covington couldn't do anything with them. They added even more. You have a real head coach. You have, assuming he's healthy, a real defensive coordinator who's going to be ready to go. I think this defense is going to carry this team and make life a lot easier for Drake May and company. But speaking of Drake May, we all hope he takes a year 2 leap. He showed plenty as a rookie, plenty for us to be encouraged about, but he's going to have more tools at his disposal now that Josh McDaniels is the offensive coordinator. The play designs are going to be significantly better from what we saw with Alex Van Pelt. They're going to stretch the defense a lot more, so he'll have a lot more open space to work with, more open receivers. He'll have more opportunities to check the ball down or throw it underneath on those 5-7 yard quick slants that we know Josh McDaniels likes to run. And also with that extra space, Drake May is going to have more ability to run with the football himself. It's not just going to be him bailing on plays like he did as a rookie. They're actually going to draw some things up for him, similar to what Josh McDaniels did with Cam Newton about, 4 or 5 years ago, what he did with Jacoby Brissett his first stint in New England. They're going to draw some things up for Drake May, but he's also going to have the defense all over the field, and if he needs to run with the football, there's going to be a lot more opportunities to do so. He's also going to have the opportunity to change protections, a la Tom Brady. Look, if Mac Jones was able to figure out how to do that as a rookie with Josh McDaniels, I'd like to think a year 2 Drake May is going to be able to figure that out, and he's going to go to the line and know how to protect himself and feel more confident once the play snap is called. I'm also not that worried about the receiving core, believe it or not. Everyone says the Patriots have a bad receiving core, they don't have elite talent, yada, yada, yada. First of all, how many elite receiving cores the Patriots have with Josh McDaniels? Not many. They had Gronk, they had Edelman, but Edelman's probably, he was hardly ever a Pro Bowler. Did he ever make the Pro Bowl? I'm not even sure. And, there's talk about him being in the Hall of Fame and all of that. Josh McDaniels works with what he has, and I think he has some good players. First of all, they added Stephon Diggs in free agency. He is not on the PUP list heading into training camp, which is a real shocker. I was expecting him to be sitting all 3 weeks of the preseason. Eventually, you activate him in late August, and he's ready to go week 1. Looks like he's ready to go right now. So, Stephon Diggs, it'll be interesting, something to monitor, just how active he is out there, particularly early on in training camp. But we've all seen the tape. We've all seen the clips with Kendrick Bourne, them practicing in North Carolina. He looks like Stephon Diggs. So, am I expecting him to be Minnesota or Buffalo Stephon Diggs? Probably not, but a number 1 receiver, certainly, from what the Patriots have had in recent years. Then you have Demario Douglas, who I think is the perfect receiver for Josh McDaniels. That slot, Julian Edelman, Wes Welker, Troy Brown type wide receiver. I think he's going to have a real breakthrough season in year 3, and he had a pretty good season last year, and a good season as a rookie when he got out of the Bill Belichick doghouse. I know Josh McDaniels is very excited to work with him. Kendrick Bourne, he's 100%. Kayshon Boutte is coming off of a surprising second year, assuming he's still on the roster. They also added Mac Hollins, who nobody talks about for whatever reason. He had more touchdowns than any receiver on this roster last season. So I think Mac Hollins is going to be sneaky good. They're also pretty undersized at receiver, and Mac Hollins gives them kind of a downfield vertical threat. Yeah, he's not the biggest guy, but he's something we haven't really seen in New England, and I think he's going to be a good option for Drake May on some of those vertical throws. Not going to be a high-volume guy, but, I don't think this is going to be, they got another free agent receiver who's going to be a bust. I think Mac Hollins, particularly working with Josh McDaniels, it's going to go pretty well. Kyle Williams was a fine addition in the draft. Who knows what happens with him, but we know he's speedy. He burned Travis Hunter numerous times when Washington State played Colorado. And then, of course, there's the Jalen Polk and Javon Baker experiment. We don't even know if those guys will be on the roster, but you hope Jalen Polk, with some real coaching, takes a leap in year 2. And we know Mike Vrabel has really put his arm around Javon Baker. Some tough love there, but he really wants to see him succeed. So a ton of competition in that wide receiver room right now. You're going to have your best 3 or 4 out there regularly, and whether that's I think it's going to be Diggs and Douglas for sure, and then we'll see how Kyle Williams, Mac Hollins, Kendrick Bourne, Kayshon Boutte potentially fit into that, and if Jalen Polk and Javon Baker even get any playing time out there. But plenty of competition. I am encouraged by this receiving core. Is it the best in the league? Of course not. Not even close. But Josh McDaniels, will work with these guys. He will understand their strengths and weaknesses and scheme it up to make life easier for the receivers and Drake May. And it's going to be far more complex. You heard Stephon Diggs talk about it a few weeks ago. He said there are a lot of things, it's a tough playbook to learn, but there's a lot of things post-snap that you have to do depending on what the defense is doing. They didn't do any of that with Alex Van Pelt. It was a simple West Coast offense. You call the play in the huddle, you go to the line, you run the play, and you hope it works out. Drake May, the receivers, they're going to have options out there, and that's really what you want to see, and that's what wins in today's NFL, and they're really going to lean on Drake May to become an NFL veteran and take on that leadership role, but so far, so good, I would say. Of course, tight end was one of the few bright spots last season. We know there's already a really strong connection with Drake May and Austin Hooper. Both are coming back. And expect Jaheim Bell to contribute more. He's another guy nobody really talks about. Kind of has slowly worked his way up, and he's not going to be a traditional tight end. I think he's going to be in a Swiss Army knife type role. May even run the football a little bit with Josh McDaniels, but that's a guy who, he's not Hunter Henry, he's not Austin Hooper, but he's going to bring something new to this offense that we really didn't see last year, and Alex Van Pelt, of course, didn't know how to use him. He was a rookie then. Heading into year 2 now, I have high expectations for Jaheim Bell, even though most people are not talking about him. Running back should be the strongest position group on offense. The final 4 teams in the NFL last season were also the top 4 running teams. Today's NFL isn't as pass-heavy as it was even 2-3 seasons ago. We saw Patrick Mahomes regress quite a bit last year. The Chiefs leaned on the run a lot more. Certainly the Philadelphia Eagles did. That's a big part of today's modern NFL. There's a lot of give and take in the NFL. It's gonna, it might be more pass-heavy by next season. We don't know. But right now, the run-heavy teams tend to win. And Patriots drafted TreVeyon Henderson, who finally signed after the dominoes fell with the second-round picks. He will eventually, I think, be their every down back. But as of right now, huge speed, big burst, incredible blocker, looks like an NFL veteran already as a blocker, can catch the ball. I would expect him to be a third down back at first with a larger workload. And then, of course, Ramondre Stevenson, he slimmed down quite a bit this offseason. We know Mike Vrabel emphasized his speed. Stevenson needs to control his fumbles. Other than the fumbles, he got off to a good start last season, broke a ton of tackles, especially in that Cincinnati game. But can he stay durable? Can he hold on to the football? Is he even going to be your best running back on the roster? He arguably was not each of the last 2 seasons. Ezekiel Elliott was better than him 2 years ago. Antonio Gibson, who's also coming back this year, was arguably the better running back than Stevenson last year. So I would expect those two, Antonio Gibson and Ramondre Stevenson, to kind of alternate that primary role. And then they'll work in TreVeyon Henderson a little bit as a primary back, and certainly they'll use him a ton on third down. He's not James White, okay? Like, he's not your small, typical third down back, but I think as a rookie, he's going to fit into that role very well. So look, expectations should be high, right? But we need to temper them a little bit, because there is one position group that is a massive red flag, a massive question mark heading into the season, and I've been talking about it ever since I started this podcast, and I think the Patriots did arguably more this offseason than they did since I started this thing, addressing the offensive line group, but these things take time, and huge question marks. And that, of course, starts with the new left tackle drafted at 4th overall, Will Campbell out of LSU. Is he the real deal? Are his arms too short? Is his frame too narrow? From everything I've heard, at least in minicamp, he held his own going up against Keon White every day in practice. But he's learning, and we don't know. We've all talked about it. If it doesn't really work out that well for Will Campbell, he'll probably be salvageable at left tackle, but maybe eventually you kick him into left guard. I hope that's not the case. I hope this is your long-term left tackle for years to come. Certainly has a good head on his shoulders, even though if those shoulders are extremely narrow. Going to run through a brick wall to protect Drake May. He's going to do everything to try to protect the quarterback, and I at least think they're going to be better, right? They're going to be a lot better than what we've seen in recent seasons with Will Campbell at left tackle, but was he worth the 4th overall pick? We're going to get that answer pretty soon, right? Like 4 to 6 weeks into the season, we're going to have a good idea who Will Campbell is and if he's the kind of guy you're going to be able to rely on the far left side for years to come. So that's obviously a big question mark. I think they'll find someone at left guard, whether that's Cole Strange, who we really haven't seen a healthy Cole Strange in quite a while. Layden Robinson, showed some signs of life last season. Sidy Sow showed no signs of life last season, but maybe with some good coaching with Doug Marrone, former head coach, now coaching the offensive line. Maybe he takes a step up. I think one of those 3 guys will be starting at left guard. The most likely candidate, of course, is Cole Strange, who has a lot to prove, right? Like, the Patriots aren't picking up the 5th year of his contract, but, he has a good year this year. Maybe he's back next year and he's your starting left guard for years to come. Center is very troubling. I was super happy the Patriots selected Jared Wilson out of the University of Georgia in the middle rounds, but he was a spectator most of minicamp after he took part in most of rookie minicamp. And I don't really know what this injury is. He did have some ankle issues at the University of Georgia, but this is a guy who should be your starting center eventually, right? I mean, he is, from everything I've heard, a workhorse, very high IQ, the kind of guy that you want snapping the football to your quarterback. And they're not going to need to lean on him as much as, Ben Brown and David Andrews last season at the center position, where in that West Coast offense, the center is the one who really makes the adjustments at the line. That all falls on Drake May now. So maybe that would make life a little bit easier for Jared Wilson inserting himself into that starting center role. But I am not encouraged if Garrett Bradbury is your starting center week 1. He's the guy the Patriots got from Minnesota via free agency this offseason. Really did not have a great season last year, but was the best available center on the market. So they took Bradbury, but they drafted Jared Wilson because, this is a guy who is a long-term starting center in the NFL, assuming he's healthy. So that's something we need to watch. Jared Wilson, is he back on the practice field 100% on Wednesday, or is he still back on the sideline? And if it's Garrett Bradbury week 1, that's going to be extremely troubling. Cole Strange maybe is going to take some snaps at center. Maybe that will happen, and they'll start Layden Robinson at left guard if Bradbury doesn't work out. But they seem to be practicing Cole Strange mostly at left guard, so as of right now, I don't think that's going to happen. Right guard, you hope the new coaching staff lights a fire under Michael Onwenu's ass. He's paid like an elite right guard. Frankly, he's paid like a right tackle, but is he going to show up in shape? Who knows? He's been a massive disappointment so far since he signed that long-term deal. Mike Onwenu should be one of the best right guards in the NFL, if not the best right guard in the NFL, and he did not play like it last season, and it'll be interesting to see what he looks like when Wednesday comes around. The only position I'm actually really confident about on the offensive line right now is Morgan Moses at right tackle. I get it. He's 34 years old. He's an aging veteran, but he's very durable. Does not miss a ton of time, particularly for his age. He's been coaching up Will Campbell throughout minicamp. Obviously not an elite right tackle, but will be a dramatic improvement on the far right side from what we've seen in recent seasons. I'm happy with the Morgan Moses signing, but really the entire season hinges on this offensive line. And to be honest with you, I still think they are another offseason away from making it work. They couldn't bring in a Ronnie Stanley, a Tyron Smith, or Cam Robinson in free agency. There just aren't that many tackles that make it to the market. So you have to do it through the draft. So, of course, they brought in Will Campbell. They brought in Jared Wilson. And maybe those guys are good right away. Maybe they're starting week 1. Will Campbell certainly, unless he gets hurt, will be starting week 1. But even then, they're going to need some time to develop. And then Morgan Moses, who I'm very happy about. He's just a stopgap for 2, maybe 3 seasons. And will likely regress considering he's 34 years old. So it's still a very shaky situation, and Patriots have a lot of work to do, even heading into next offseason. They may win 11 games this year. They're still going to need to address this offensive line, and I feel like a broken record talking about it on this podcast, about the offensive line, but it's still a problem, and maybe Doug Marrone, having a real head coach a hard ass out there, paired with Mike Vrabel, with Josh McDaniels, Dante Scarnecchia coming in as a consultant. They can figure it out, but they need more talent on that offensive line, and I'm sorry, I just don't think this group is going to cut it. I think this group could be salvageable, but a lot of things have to go right. Will Campbell has to be ready to go week 1. They need to figure out the left guard spot. Is that Cole Strange? Is that Robinson? Is Jared Wilson your starting center? Are you back with someone who's a liability, like Garrett Bradbury or Ben Brown, or you put Cole Strange back there? Is Michael Wenu going to be in shape? And then Morgan Moses, is he going to regress at this point in his career? Way too many question marks, and the idea that they're going to hit 5 out of 5 of those, highly unlikely. So that is a concern, and I think it's going to be a concern all season long. And perhaps that's the reason why the Patriots, they're over-under odds, 8.5 wins this season. So they get 9, you win money. They get 8, you lose the money, assuming you're betting the over. But let's take a look at the schedule, right? Because, yeah, the Patriots are the favorite in 11 of those games. 11 of 17 games, the Patriots are actually the favorite, even though the over-under is 8.5 wins. So they're 3.5-point favorites against the Raiders week 1. 2.5-point underdogs on the road at Miami week 2. 1.5-point favorites against the Steelers week 3. 3.5-point favorites week 4 at home against the Panthers. So right off the bat, the Patriots should be starting off 3-1. Losing that game in Miami as they often do, but beating the Raiders, beating the Steelers, beating the Panthers. That Steelers game, I'm actually not that worried about. I know they have Aaron Rodgers, but that's going to be a bleep show over there. We all know that. The Panthers, that should be a winnable game. I do worry a little bit about the Raiders week 1. Pete Carroll now there. They have a quarterback that, not one of the best in the league, Geno Smith, but pretty good and the type of guy who carved up the Patriots defense last season. Again, that was Gerard Mayo, but that's a tough first-round matchup, and it's very likely that the Raiders are competing in the AFC West. The Chiefs take a step back, the Chargers take a leap forward, the Raiders take a leap forward. That's going to be a tough division, and that week 1 matchup is going to be very interesting. If the Patriots lose badly, don't think that this is just a bad team. I think the Raiders might actually be a very good team. So 3.5 points. It might be 3-point favorites, depending on which site you're looking at. I'm looking at DraftKings as of right now. Then heading to week 5, 8.5-point underdogs on the road against the Bills. That makes sense. Then they're 3-point favorites on the road against the Saints. 1.5-point favorites on the road against the Titans, which is really interesting. They give the Saints 3 points, and they only give the Titans 1.5 points. Both games are on the road for New England. Maybe the Titans are better, but I don't think they're going to be that much better this year. Then they have Cleveland Browns coming to Foxborough. Patriots are 5.5-point favorites there. Falcons coming to Foxborough. They're 3-point favorites there. And then they go on the road to Tampa, 4.5-point underdogs. Jets come to New England. Patriots are 5.5-point favorites. 4.5-point underdogs on the road against Cincinnati the following week. And then week 13 before the bye, they're 3-point favorites at home against the New York Giants. And then we get to the final 4 weeks of the season. 4.5-point underdogs at home against the Bills. 8.5-point underdogs on the road against the Ravens. That makes a ton of sense. Then they're 1.5-point favorites on the road against the Jets and 2.5-point favorites against the Dolphins at home. So quite a swing there with Miami. 2.5-point underdogs on the road and then 2.5-point favorites when Miami comes to Foxborough late in the year. But that makes a lot of sense. You're going in 90, 100-degree heat, humidity in Miami, and then Miami has to travel to potentially the coldest game of the year in Foxborough. So if you look at the schedule, the Patriots should win 11 games this year, right? 11 of the games, they are favorites, which is shocking compared to where they were coming out of Week 17 when Gerard Mayo was fired. But again, they're baking in the uncertainty of the NFL. The Raiders could be a lot better. Maybe the Dolphins don't regress as much as we think they do. Maybe the Jets, with some good coaching, are a little bit better. And that's perhaps why they're 8.5 points. They're 8.5 wins when it comes to the over-under. Look, I do think it's playoffs or bust for this team. Now, bust doesn't mean you fire Mike Vrabel if they miss the playoffs. Now, if they win 4 games again, then you start having those conversations. I really don't think that's going to happen. Patriots are going to benefit greatly from the schedule that they have this season. I wouldn't be shocked if they did win 10 or 11 games. And then next season, have a first or second place schedule, probably second place. I don't think they're going to beat the Bills. And then they're back to 9-10 wins, even though they're a better team. That's just the way the NFL works. But huge favor for the Patriots getting the schedule. Really the only game that I'm like, crap, the Patriots got that game is Miami early on in week 2. All these other games, they're positioned very well. And, late in the season, you have the Bills and the Ravens back-to-back. And presumably the Patriots are going to be fighting for a playoff spot then. But other than that, there really isn't anything here that stands out that makes you think they can't win that game, right? Even going into Tampa or going to Cincinnati, where the Patriots won last season, those might be winnable games. So the NFL's weird. There's lots of give and take. Teams that were great one season are not so great the next. They're going to win games that we're shocked that they won, and they're going to lose games that we thought they should have won. And that's just the way the NFL works. But in my opinion, this team should win 9 or 10 games. I think 11, even though they're favored in 11 games, I think that might be a stretch because of all the concerns I outlined with the offensive line. But 10 or 11, or 9 or 10 should be achievable. But let me know in the comments, what do you think the final win total is going to be for the Patriots, and do you expect them to make the postseason this year? And finally, in other news, I do want to talk about Terry McLaurin, because this is getting interesting by the day. Every day, there seems to be a report about Terry McLaurin being dissatisfied with his contract negotiations with the Washington Commanders, or whatever their team name is going to eventually be. According to Henry McKenna of Fox Sports, if necessary, McLaurin will explore every option, including a holdout, a hold-in, or potentially a trade request. Now, we know the Washington Commanders, they do not want to see this guy leave, right? They brought in Jaden Daniels as a rookie who was immediately one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Terry McLaurin has always been a pretty solid receiver, but finally got the attention that he deserved. And removing McLaurin from Jaden Daniels year 2, that's not something they want to do. So Washington's going to do everything they possibly can to bring back Terry McLaurin. But if the Patriots can get him via trade, they should absolutely do it. Look, he's 6 foot tall, but he plays a lot bigger than that. I talked about this receiving core and how undersized they are. McLaurin is a go up and get it type receiver, but can run every route that you ask him to do. He's a real team leader, a team captain, kind of a late bloomer in his career. He's going to be turning 30 years old very soon. But as I said, Washington hasn't gotten a ton of attention until this past season. McLaurin's been very, very good the last few seasons. And unless Stephon Diggs is back to his prime form, you trade for Terry McLaurin. He's your number 1 wide receiver. Or maybe it takes Diggs a little bit, and those two are 1A and 1B. You should do it. If you can do it, you should absolutely do it. And yeah, I know it's a crowded receiving room, and you're going to have to let some guys go, but you have Terry McLaurin, Stephon Diggs, Demario Douglas, Mac Hollins, Kayshon Boutte, Kendrick Bourne, Kyle Williams, who we hope will be impactful. You suddenly go back from the worst receiving core in the NFL to one of the very best if you had a guy like Terry McLaurin. So why would the Commanders trade him, right? Like, it seems crazy. Well, he obviously hasn't been able to get a deal done. Terry McLaurin wants $30+ million a year at 30 years old. That's a lot to pay a receiver at this point in his career. But the Patriots have about $60 million in cap space to spend. Now, eventually they're going to have to pay Drake May. Eventually they're going to have to pay Christian Gonzalez. But there's certain things you can tinker with in the books to make all of that work. And they still have the most cap space in the NFL. There are very few teams in the NFL that could trade for a Terry McLaurin and then extend him for $30+ million a year. The Patriots are one of the few teams that can actually do it. Now, I don't think the Washington Commanders, assuming they can't come to a deal and they have to get rid of Terry McLaurin, they're not going to trade him for a first-round pick. And I would do it, right? Patriots, if they have a bad season, they probably have the 10th overall pick. If they have a good season, they're going to have the 20th overall pick. That's just not that valuable. But more importantly, the Commanders, they want to win right now. They added Laramie Tunsil as their starting left tackle. They just signed Von Miller the other day to bolster that defense. At first, doesn't add anything to their odds, and trading McLaurin dramatically diminishes it. So you probably have to unload Kendrick Bourne and or Kayshon Boutte along with some draft picks to get Terry McLaurin. And I say you do it. I think Kayshon Boutte is far more valuable in that he's heading into his third season. Had a very good year too in a poor offense, was really Drake May's only vertical weapon out there. Kendrick Bourne brings veteran leadership to the locker room. He's worked with Josh McDaniels before. And then Kayshon Boutte also had trouble with Alex Van Pelt's playbook and lining up in the correct spot. What's that going to look like now with Josh McDaniels? You probably trade Kayshon Boutte in a second or third rounder, and maybe you put in Kendrick Bourne or throw in Jalen Polk and say, hey, you deal with him. Maybe you can turn him into something. And then Washington, look, they don't want to do that, right? They don't want to do that right now. But if Terry McLaurin is holding out throughout training camp, and he's really pissed off about this contract, which I totally understand, by the way. And this is not like a diva receiver upset about his contract, being a distraction in the locker room. No, Terry McLaurin is going to be 30 years old, signing his last lucrative contract. He probably should have done this last year, but Washington, he hadn't done enough. He hadn't been in the spotlight enough to ask for a big contract extension. He's looking out for himself, as he should at this point in his career. I'm not going to knock him for that at all. And you add him to the Patriots, he is not going to be a distraction, assuming you extend his contract, right? Like, he's not going to be happy if he gets traded for and it's still under the same contract. And the Patriots wouldn't do that. They would extend him. Question is, are they willing to pay $30+ million a year? They were willing to do it with Chris Godwin. I would much rather have Terry McLaurin at this point in his career than Chris Godwin at this point in his career. Again, Washington's not going to do it, right? Unless they absolutely have to. And then you unload Boutte, Polk, Bourne, and throw in some draft picks. And that probably will do it. And then you make sure to extend him for around $30 million a year. Wouldn't want to sign him super long term, right? Probably similar to Stephon Diggs, a 3-year deal with some incentives built in, especially in the 2 years down the road. But man, if you can have Terry McLaurin and Stephon Diggs and Demario Douglas and Kyle Williams, it's completely changes the complexion of this New England Patriots roster. And now you're not just talking about playoffs or bust. I don't want to say the word contending, but you have a team that can make a real playoff run with Terry McLaurin. But again, this offensive line is the red flag. It's the big question mark. And the idea that the Patriots are going to hit all 5 of those positions and they're all going to work out perfectly, highly unlikely, even with Doug Marrone, Mike Vrabel, and Josh McDaniels, and Dante Scarnecchia factored into that. There's going to need to be a lot of development, and this training camp is going to be very important for understanding if this offensive line is salvageable for not just this season, but these guys are good for years to come. Be watching this week, because we're going to get some questions, and when they put on pads next week, we're going to get some real answers to those questions. So you're not going to want to miss it. Glad to be back with you with PatsCast. No more hiatus. Ton of content coming out. We'll be here to cover it throughout training camp. If you like this video and you're watching on YouTube, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, or subscribe if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm Brad Whitaker. We'll be back very soon with more New England Patriots coverage.